The new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook Wild Game Recipes for the Grill, Smoker, Campfire, and Camp Stove is out on April 24th and is available for pre-order now. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside, from grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Pre-order your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com.
Hey, this is Tyler Jones, and you're listening to the Element Podcast. What's happening, all my woods people? Casey, the weatherman called for a lot of rain today, but I don't think he called it right.
He might have just, it is probably going to happen today.
Maybe.
It's just going to happen way later in the day.
Yeah, it was supposed to pick up at like 9:15, so I went and moved to stand, and it is thundering, apparently.
Oh, the weather, there is weather. The weather outside is weather today. But
we're not getting as much rain as I thought we were going to.
Mm-mm.
But speaking of calling, we have a man who has a really good idea about lots of different whitetail calls.
We do.
On the podcast today.
We do. His name's Rod White. He is a former Olympic gold and bronze medalist in field archery, and he works for the National Field Archery Association. And although he spends a lot of time at the range, Rod is also a stone cold killer when it comes to wood stuff. So Rod is going to talk to us today. I found Rod on a YouTube video where he did some really aggressive calling, like things that I would have never have thought to do to a whitetail buck, and ended up shooting the buck. So we're going to discuss all things calling to whitetails.
And Rod spent some time around like deer farm stuff, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And so like he has a good idea of, and we were talking about that this morning kind of, but like body language especially, you know, like how to read body language and assume or anticipate what call you might need to use next, which is really cool. And you can really only gain that experience, I feel like, from actually sitting in a stand and watching deer, which we tend to have a hard time doing on public in Texas.
That's right, man. It's been actually kind of one of the nice things about having these permission places where, like, there's just more deer around, it seems. You know, the deer densities are higher, and for me, at least, I get to watch some deer. Doesn't always work out, though. Like the other night, I drove past my permission place and saw some deer in the pasture, and then decided from that observance that the next night I would go out there and try to hunt them and at least do like an observation sit. Well, it was not even an observation sit because I did not observe a single deer while sitting there yesterday evening, and it really, really stunk. And I don't know, I was texting you about it this morning, and it just seems that, like, if you want to pattern deer, at least in the area where we live, like, pattern the unpredictability, because pretty much if they do something one night, they're not going to do the same thing the next day. That's just kind of how they work. It's so strange, and I don't know how to use that to my advantage, but I guess I need to really put some thought into it.
Well, I know one way you kind of explained to me, if we are lucky enough to have this situation arise again this year, then we can definitely give it a try. But last year with Teenager, if you have listened to the Jeff Sturgis podcast, I talked about this situation in particular. But with Teenager, there was no distinct pattern, and so Jeff's idea was that maybe the pattern is bigger. Maybe it's that this buck spends 2 days here and then goes to this area for 2 days and then goes to that area for 2 days, then to that area for 2 days and back around to the first area again, or whatever it might be. Maybe that's more of his pattern. It's a big, wide rut circle, I guess. And so I looked at that and nothing showed up. Not as far as a pattern goes, So I was like just so disappointed, like, what do I do? And your theory here could be handy, where if, like say, like last year we had 4 cameras out, or 4 different places that we had cameras, on this big property, and he would show up for two to 3 days on one. It seemed like. Well, maybe if you go into a spot on that property and you check that camera, and he's been there the last 2 days or 3 days, go to another spot that's somewhere pretty close by, I guess,
Yeah.
And
but how hard is that going to be to do? Like literally, like you've got the same deer on camera for 3 days straight, and you're going to make yourself go somewhere else because you think that like you're trying to hit his predictability.
I know. Well, I know.
It's going to be so hard to do, man.
The ideal situation would be if he came in last night.
Yeah.
And then you could just set up there and be like, okay, he's probably going to do it again tonight or the next night. And then you would have a good reason to sit there on it, I guess. That would be the ideal situation. But at this point, we still don't know where Teenager is. So
we haven't checked the cameras over there in quite a while.
Yeah.
It's been like almost a month.
Has it?
I think so. It's been a long time, man.
Because we did see that one buck the last time we checked over there that was like his offspring.
It was like October 4th, I think, or something like that. So it's been a little while. I'm ready to get back over there, but it's going to be a little bit before I get over there. I think you might go over there some before we leave, but you and I are about to have a little rutcation of our own pretty quick. And so from November 4th to whenever, we're not going to be in the state of Texas anymore. We're going to head out and go to the Midwest and try to do that thing again. I know that you and I have got some tactics to work out on this thing, because the place that we killed the nameless buck last year and did all that sweet video work or whatever we did over there, none of that is going to be able to be hunted the whole time we're gone because of the wind.
Yeah.
So,
there's a good chance that Mr. Weatherman.
Yeah, it definitely could change. I know that.
As the way it's looking right now, you're right.
Unless we want to like predict the unpredictability like we do with the deer.
yeah. We're going to predict that the Weatherman.
Yeah, exactly. But we're going to have to do a little bit of map scouting, which, I hate that.
I know. That's like one of your least favorite things to do.
Yeah, and figure out some places to go on some different winds. So I'm pretty excited, dude.
Yeah, I've done a little map scouting in the last like a month and a half or so, because I've been planning to go up there for at least that long and have just not been able to. But I was going to make some trips through. If I was going to go by myself, I was going to make some trips and sleep in the back of my truck through different areas that we haven't been able to see, that are kind of out of the way, or this or that or whatever, and see if there's anything worth looking at. And I think there are, looking at the maps, but there's definitely, we're definitely going to have to really, now that we know the wind direction, try to key in and find 5 or 6 places that we can either sit or decoy, because we're going to try to, I think that's one thing you and I have talked about quite a bit, is being, like when you're hunting out of state and you got 2 tags, you got to be efficient kind of, So I feel like that making deer come to you by employing a rattling sequence on the ground with a decoy is one way to possibly make things happen faster for you.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a lot of different variables that could possibly cause you to shoot a young deer or not be happy with the deer that you shot, in other words, or, just like that deer come in downwind because he knows you're there and he's going to try to get a whiff of you, as opposed to if you're sitting in a stand. Like last year, that buck came directly upwind of us,
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's we got plenty of time to talk about it on the way up there, but I'm looking forward to some spicy ketchup and some Whataburger.
Got to get that last Whataburger before you head out of the state, man.
Dude, you know it.
Yeah, one of the big parts of, that whole ground attack, like running and gun with a decoy and the rattling and all that, is going to be the vocal aspect of it, man. We're going to have to use our grunt calls and get deer attention.
I mean, you could probably just rely on mine.
Probably.
My grunt call.
Yeah, we can go ahead and say, I don't know the brand of that, but just don't buy that little itty-bitty green and gray one. That's not the best. But
I need to practice with it.
Yeah.
Just in case.
Just in case. You should probably just mouth grunt at that point.
But
why don't we get Rod on the phone and figure out some actual good grunting techniques as opposed to just little gray things?
That sounds like a good idea.
Okay.
All right, so on the phone now we have Olympic gold medal archer Rod White. How's the summer treating you, Rod?
Pretty good. Pretty hot, actually.
Yeah? And you're up in the Iowa area, so it's pretty hot it's a little above normal, I guess, or?
Yeah, and actually, past couple of days we've had a little bit of break in the weather. It seems, but it's been hot here at times, like over the top hot for me anyhow.
What's that look like up there? I'm just interested.
As far as temperature?
Yeah, temperature wise.
Usually, we're kind of in the low 90s, but we've had a couple days I've gotten up in the mid 90s, and the big thing for us is humidity. It just it kills you up here, and those hot nights are awesome towards the end of the evening to go out and scout for some velvet bucks. But outside of that, I don't really want anything to do with it. I'd rather be in Montana or Idaho or something.
Dude, that's exactly how I feel. I always take a July or later trip to the Rocky Mountains because it's just brutal down here. You know, we deal with pretty high humidity as well. You know, we're close enough to the Gulf that it's pretty brutal, I think, and we've had some really hot days this summer. We had a spell. At first, I thought it was just going to be cold summer. I mean, we didn't hardly get into any kind of 90-degree weather, and then all of a sudden it was like 108 for consecutive days, and it was just brutal. So
we are ready to do that.
We're ready for November, man. I'm telling you, for a lot of reasons. So, as I understand, you're an Olympic gold medal archer, man. I have to hear a little bit about that experience.
So I guess maybe to back up a little bit, I got started hunting in Pennsylvania is where I grew up. Got started hunting there, went out, missed a few deer, and to really make a long story short, my dad and my brother made me my dad made me go to a local club, and I showed up there with my compound ready to shoot some animal targets. Back then, I know there were some 3Ds, but they weren't very popular at all where we were yet. And I was hoping to at least shoot paper targets of animals, and here they just had these Olympic style faces up there, the classic like yellow, red, blue, black kind of deal. And there were two older folks in there who were teaching the class, and they were adamant that you had to learn how to shoot with a recurve bow, and I was ready to walk out, to be honest with you.
I would be too.
My dad just told me if you're gonna shoot, you need to go through those lessons, and I went to some local shoots, and I did really well. Recurve only, so you can't use a release, you can't use a scope. You can use stabilizers, but you're just shooting with a stick and a string for the most part with your fingers. And we went to a national championship, I think it was towards the end of that year, and there were like 46 kids in there, and I came in like 44th. And for whatever reason, that flipped the switch in me, and I just decided I was going to come back and be in the top 10. And I shot that whole year, every chance I got, before school and after school, pretty much till dark, with the exception of hunting season there. And then got into the top. I think I was in the top 3 that year. And then the following year, I made the goal to win it, and I won. And then pretty soon, I was just sucked into that tournament archery world where we went everywhere from Italy to Indonesia, shooting all over the world and junior world championships, and won a lot of stuff through there. And
cool.
Eventually wound up at the Olympic Games.
Yeah. And so you haven't missed a deer yet since then, right?
Oh, no, I've missed a couple. Until somebody figures out how to make them stop moving.
That's right. That's right, man. We've actually had several podcasts that we've done this summer because to me, one of the most interesting things, the most intriguing things, and maybe difficult to figure out in the whitetail world is string jump and why and when it happens, kind of thing. So we've been trying to talk to many experts on that, and it's a difficult subject to pin down, like when, like I said, when they're going to move or when they're going to just be a big gnarly buck that doesn't care if a string goes off 40 yards away or whatever. It's crazy. Yep. Crazy. I mean, how long after you started shooting, basically when you learned from your teachers there on the recurve, what was it from then until you were in the Olympics? How many years is that?
Boy, that would have been, I started there probably when I was, I'm going to say 13, and won the gold in Atlanta would have been 96. So that would have been, I was 19 at the time, so it would have been 6 years.
Okay. That's cool, man. I can't even imagine something like that, being in. I love the Olympics so much. I mean, our family, my wife and I, when it comes on, it is on every single day, all day long. If we have TV, which sometimes we don't have TV, so that's just the deal. But we think it's the coolest thing in the world, man, and that's really awesome. I bet your family was proud of you, man.
Oh yeah, absolutely. First time I was here in the U.S. and I went again in 2000. At the time in '96 when I won the gold, I was shooting for PSE. And I wanted to get back into shooting 3D archery right away and go back on to my hunting lifestyle. And, of course, I had huge opportunities. Realtree treated me very well. A lot of financial opportunities with, like, Gander Mountain and some other folks. And I went down that road and pretty much literally hunted for a living and shot my bow competitively for a living for a long time. Mm-hmm. And getting to that second Olympic Games, I went to work for Matthews and helped build a recurve that, oddly enough, we never sold. Built a recurve so that Matt could have a bow in the Olympic Games, and pulled that off. And then I got into real estate and land management sales, and was doing that for quite some time. And in a weird roundabout way, now I'm back to growing the sport of archery again with the National Field Archery Association.
That's cool. What can you tell us a little bit about that? What you're doing now?
Yeah, so the National Field Archery Association, I believe we're the nation's largest bow hunting and target archery organization for sure, and possibly target archery. I want to say it is. My boss would kill me if I didn't have that right. But, I work basically side by side with several different organizations to help grow the sport of bow hunting, or will be, and my job encompasses a lot of providing the social media content from a hunting perspective and somewhat from a target archery perspective, but with the goal is basically just to grow our numbers as bow hunters and increase our bow hunting memberships.
Mm-hmm. You know, there's a slim chance that your boss doesn't listen to this podcast. I mean, this is prestige worldwide, man. I'm telling you. I'm telling you right now. So did Gander Mountain give you all their money, or how does that work?
It was a pretty big contract for me. I mean, it was big enough that I didn't have to worry about nothing for a while. Yeah.
That's cool, man.
And,
that's awesome. That's I mean, that's cool. That's as cool as it gets, man. It's that's the American dream, right? We work really hard to achieve something, and then make a way for yourself, you know, and for your family, and maybe generations that follow you, you know.
Yeah, and there was a ton of experience for me, you know, where I hunted a lot of guided type things, and I actually worked as a guide and outfitter in Montana and New Mexico when I was 19 and 20, right around the time, actually right after the games. I left from the Olympic Games and went straight to work as a guiding in southeast Montana for elk, and pretty much a greenhorn, which is bizarre, but that happens all the time in the guiding world.
Yeah, I figured that out. It's usually they don't care how good you are at calling. It's more about, you know, if you got a strong back and strong legs and can hike a long ways. Apparently that's what it takes to be a guide.
Well, you work for $100 a day, because if you're on the team. And glad to do it, right? Because you're in the mountains and around elk. I do that for $100 a day right now. Somebody call me. Well, the cool thing about it was I met a lot of cool people, and throughout that entire time, I kept at almost every hunt religiously. Somebody that I was guiding would say, you know, boy, I hope you really enjoy this, and no matter what you do, you know, kill as many things in the mountains as you can, because when you turn 50, 60 years old, most of these guys were around 40, you may not have the health that you need to be able to do it. And I kind of listened for a while, and then I got really heavy into the whitetail thing again, and you know, with my own business here revolving around whitetails, as I was doing all the other things, shooting competitively and the bow hunting stuff, I got to the point where, you know, from a guiding perspective for me, if you could put me on a 250-inch whitetail with a guide, and I'd have absolutely no interest whatsoever, just none. And it's nothing against guides and outfitters. It's just not my deal. I don't feel like I've accomplished anything. I feel like I've just showed up and squeezed the trigger.
Yeah. Kind of a shooter more than a hunter.
Yeah. Yep. Especially on the TV deals.
Right. Yeah. Yep. I hear you, man. Yeah. You mentioned, you know, the advice that you got there: shoot whatever you can while you're in the mountains. And I talked to KC about this actually today, and I have this kind of, I don't know, weird issue. We're from East Texas. We didn't really grow up in the Western world. Things have out there a lot more publicized these days. It's something that everybody wants to go do now. And so, like, I'm not that far ahead of a lot of people probably in the points game. I've got a few species that I've been putting in for 8 years or whatever, and then, the rest of them I may have 2, 3, 4 points at most. And there's just, I can't afford to put in for, every hunt that I would like to go on eventually. Not to mention, I look at some of these things and I'm like, with point creep, like, there's a really good chance that I literally don't ever draw that tag, I feel like, at this point. So
I can give you a little inspiration.
I need it, dude. That's exactly what I'm about to ask.
So I don't have a ton of cash to throw at tags, and a lot of the stuff I'm doing is content for my job, so it's kind of job related. And with the limited funds that I use on my hunts, I hunt almost all over the counter stuff. And a couple years ago, I decided that I should just start putting in for points wherever I could afford it. So I put in for points for the most part in states where I don't have to put that money up front, with the exception of Montana, because I want that Montana tag every year. Mm-hmm. I know a lot of places in Montana very well, so I want that tag. But for example, in Utah, I put in last year for deer, or for elk and deer, and I put in for this year because there's a slight chance you could draw. I put in for the Paunsaugunt for elk and mule deer. And my thought process was I would never draw the tag because I have a very good friend, Benton Christensen, who lives out in Utah, and he had like 22 points last year, and he finally drew a San Juan bull tag. And when you look at the math and the numbers, it's kind of spooky because, boy, it may have taken 22 points now, but in theory that's probably going to be like 40 to 60 points, mm-hmm. especially since our bow hunting numbers keep growing. So I threw in for that, planning not to get a tag because I have my own plans for Idaho and Montana every year. And I put in for Wyoming. And I got a phone call, it would have been about a week ago, and a gal said, it's just so-and-so from the Utah Division of Fish and Wildlife. And I was like, well, I haven't been in the state of Utah for like 15 years. I didn't hunt there, and I'm not associated with anybody that did anything wrong there. Because I don't know why in the world you're calling me.
Yeah.
And she just started giggling, and she said, no, sir, I'm calling to tell you have a Paunsaugunt bull tag. You've been drawn for a Paunsaugunt bull tag.
Oh, my gosh.
And I said, I suppose you want my credit card number? And she said, yeah. And I laughed, and I said, that's pretty funny.
There's no money in that account.
Yeah. Well, no, I just said, I said, I don't think so, Scooter, and I hung up the phone. And I thought about it for like 20 minutes because as I was thinking about it driving down the road, I thought, wait a second. I'm like, there's no way. I mean, you hear about credit card scams. So in my head, I was being scammed and I need to give her my credit card and, she'll rack it up. Mm-hmm. And I thought, I better call. I just better call back. Yeah. So I called back. I called back a little bit later and I said, hey, this is my name's Rod White, and I actually need to speak to somebody, I think, in licensing. Just curious if anybody's working in there or can answer some questions for me. And they're like, oh, yeah, we'll transfer you over. And she answered the phone. And I'm like, all right. I feel like a complete tool shed right now. And she laughed. She goes, this is Rod White, isn't it? I'm like, yeah. She goes, well, do you want the tag or not? And I said, yeah, I think I'd like to have it. So I scrounged around to find a credit card.
Man, that's too cool.
But 1 point. That's all I had was 1 point. And what had happened was there's 2 non-resident tags available, and I think 18 residents. So one of those non-residents had turned back in their tag because it's been, for the most part in that region, a drought area this year, I guess. Mm-hmm. And the upper age class of bulls pushing that 400-inch line is just not probably possible.
Yeah.
And so after talking with a couple people there, 340 to 360 kind of bull would be a top end bull. it's not the holy grail of elk hunting, but it's probably number 3 or number 4 in the state. And for me, I mean, that's way better than an over-the-counter Idaho elk tag. I mean, I usually find a good one, but my gosh.
Yeah, that's not a bad 1-point tag if you ask me.
No, not at all.
Golly, dude.
I took it.
That's killer, man. I dream of that hunt, and I'll go on it one day. I'm building points in Arizona, and I have quite a few, but I dream of something like that happening. And I actually had a buddy first year putting in Montana draw a bighorn sheep this year, and we were in shock. I was talking to him on the phone, and he was like, I can't believe my eyes that I'm looking at this piece of mail right now. And so, I guess it can happen. And yeah, that's definitely, those are inspiring stories for me. I just have trouble putting in, so how many hunts do you actually apply for? Do you have a number, like a year out west?
I don't put, there's guys that put a lot more into it than I do. I put in for Utah, because basically I can just buy,
extra animals or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah. So.
Wyoming this year, I did not put in for the Wyoming draw. I just grabbed a point.
Yeah.
And that wasn't very expensive, $20 to $50. Can't remember what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then Montana, I'm building points for a special draw. There's a couple units, one in particular I really want to get in, which I may or may not in my lifetime, but, and those are pretty much all I put in for draws. And I don't, for whatever reason, muleys don't overly fascinate me. And elk, for me, I don't even look at a bull and think like, oh, that's a 360 bull. Maybe I better hold off for a 380 bull. Like, that doesn't ever process my mind. And I've shot a lot of elk. I think that's a big mature animal, just like for whitetails for me now.
Sure.
I've been super blessed to have a lot of opportunities at really big whitetails. And I just nothing really squeezes it, nothing really flips a switch on me except for the age class of that animal. And some of it has to do with, believe it or not, the harder the hunt, the more excited I am when I get an opportunity to mature animal. I just want to take the biggest representative or the oldest representative animal that I can in that area for whatever it is that I'm hunting, if that makes sense.
Yeah, dude, that's cool. I think you just made a lot of statements about how you line up with KC and I. I mean, he talks about the experience all the time and passes big old giant Texas public land bucks because he's looking for a mature one, But no, I'm kidding. But I being from having that elk hunting background, is there anything you've learned from calling elk that you would use when you're calling whitetails?
I would say that I probably was way more aggressive with whitetails because just the weird, I shouldn't say weird, but the circumstances I've been in until I was introduced to mature whitetails. So in 96, I was already headed out west to go guide, but that fall, or the following fall, I think it was, I came out to Illinois to hunt. Actually, I was invited by, it's actually my ex-father-in-law owns Mrs. Dopey's bucklore, Sam Calora. He invited me out to hunt in his place in Iowa, and that summer I'd come out to see him and actually shot off of, we used to shoot, I used to do demonstrations for PSE when they had the truck driving around everywhere, and there was a Farm King Stores was the name of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would stand on the top of there and shoot balloons at 100 yards for demonstrations in front of their stores.
Mm-hmm.
And it was part of a summer festival thing. And guy gave me his number who owns those, Rick Severs, his name, super good guys, the whole Severs family. And I just, of course I kept it. I came out to hunt deer in Iowa because I got that celebrity tag. You still had to draw back then, but they had celebrity tags that you could apply for. Well, Mrs. Dopey applied for a tag for me. I drew the tag, or got the tag, however that worked, and then went on the hunt. As soon as I got here, one of the first deer I saw was like a 120-inch deer, and I stuck an arrow right through it. And then I was like, "Holy crap!" Awesome. I'm calling everybody at home, and then I got to camp, and then some people are bringing like 150s and 160s. I'm like, "Wait a second,
it's the smallest buck here."
That's awesome. That's cool.
So I was like, "Huh." And I called back Rick Severs over there in Illinois because at the time, as a non-resident, you could buy 2 buck tags. and I called him like, hey, I shot my deer over here, and like in the first hour, and I realized there's some bigger ones. I'm like, is there any chance I could come over and hunt like you invited me before? He's like, oh yeah, come on down. So I met him at some cabin. Couldn't even tell you where it was now. I mean, it was near Macomb, Illinois, and he had said, gave me directions. I pulled in, and there was an old doctor that owned the place, and he hadn't been there yet, and this guy was cooking up steaks. It was a super cool experience. And then Rick had come in with like I think it was probably like a 160-inch framed buck with a G2 and a G3 broken off the right side, and I'm like, holy freak! And that's the biggest deer I'd ever seen outside of Sam's world record kind of deer.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, holy flip, dude! I'm like, where'd you get that from? This guy just shot it yesterday and just bring it over to boil out the skull, I guess. I'm like, are you gonna mount it? No, I probably shouldn't have even shot it, but I got, at the time they had 5 tags as residents.
Oh my God.
Like, so I don't, he's like, I probably shouldn't have shot it, should let it get bigger. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, I should have let it get bigger. And the concept of deer growing in my head and maturing and growing in coordination with their antler size was so foreign to me, being from Pennsylvania, because I'd never seen a deer over 120 inches until I got to Iowa.
Sure.
Yeah.
And man, it was that circumstance. I think when circling all the way back to their question, I got some serious ADHD issues.
No, man,
obviously,
those were great stories.
Yeah.
Tell more of those.
But circling all the way back to that elk hunting thing, I'd already been elk hunting and was in amazing bulls, because at the time I was guiding on the CMR, the Charles and Russell, which a lot of people know as the Missouri River breaks.
Mm-hmm.
But I was on that CMR on limited entry tags, and I had nothing to do with them. I was just guiding for them. So I was calling in bulls. There weren't a whole lot of other bow hunters out there at the time, and in my head, I was just going to take a deer call and try to call some of these older deer, because he had a call laying on the table, and I said, so can you show me how to use that? He's like, I don't know, he's just blowing it. I'm like, well, you can't just blow on it, because you don't just blow on a bugle to, like, I mean, it has to have some kind of meaning, I was thinking in my head. And I thought about it quite a bit. I went out hunting, I think that next day or whatever, with him. And I called in a pretty good buck with a grunt, just blowing a simple grunt. And then at some point on its way in, it didn't like whatever I was saying. And you could see its body language completely change and walk away. And I think a lot of that was spurred from what I'd learned in the little bit of elk hunting experience that I had, is that if I communicated the wrong thing, it's not even how you talk or the way you're well, I shouldn't say that. It's not. It's like your voice and my voice sound differently. Mm-hmm. You can tell that there are fluctuations in that voice that make you feel different feelings. And I learned that pretty quick. For whatever reason, that was just something I latched onto. And after several years of shooting a bunch of deer in Illinois and Iowa, I was contracted with Gander to do so many grand openings and so many appearances a year. So I was at the Minnesota Game Fair, and I was doing a seminar there. And then, I don't know, wasn't a whole lot of people in there, probably like 30 people. And I was doing a seminar on how to communicate with deer. And there was a young kid standing there after it was all over with. And he's like, man, where'd you get that call from? And I said, I don't know. I suppose the guys at Gander gave it to me. It didn't have a logo, label, nothing on it. And he's like, well, that's my dad's. I'm like, I didn't steal your dad's call. He's like, no, my dad makes those. And I'm like, oh, well, that's pretty cool. And I was like, is he here? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I want you to meet him. He was all excited. JJ Ducart's his name, and Mike Ducart owns the company. And I went over and met Mike, and we started talking about calls. And at the time, he'd done a lot of waterfowl stuff, and he just started with that call, which was kind of the foundation, I believe, for the extinguisher that I use all the time now.
Oh, really?
And we got to talking, and in the seminars, he was just fascinated, because for him, for waterfowl, the way he worked those waterfowl vocally had a lot to do with the impact on the end result of what happened on that hunt for those waterfowl. So when we started talking, I was explaining to him how, I don't feel like I don't just blow on it. I mean, there's certain things I do when I do them. And he said, well, I'm going to send my son down if you don't mind to hunt with you. And JJ came down and hunted a couple times, and he'd asked me about a hunt, I think off the phone earlier, with about it was a 170-inch deer or something like that I'd shot down here, where I'd called a buck off of a doe. On that whole sequence, when they went back and reviewed it, they were like, wow, you got to come up for an interview. Mm-hmm. And from then on, I mean, the communication aspect of things has always been important to me. But I think just because of that elk hunting thing, where I understood it a lot differently, or what it was taught to me by an outfitter a lot differently than how I would have normally approached whitetails anywhere else. And I wasn't scared to talk to them. And a lot of times they talk back, which sounds as goofy as that sounds. I've had them respond a lot. I know they've got lots of videos on one of them's, a lot of guys and gals listening to this probably seen the Croaker videos. So it was a 9.5-year-old deer that, I mean, that goofy thing would respond to me like a bull with a bugle all the time. But if I treated them wrong, or I said something wrong, it's learning the whole time. It's a learning process all the time. And the big thing for me is you watch their behavior. And if you see a negative reaction, not only do you stop completely, but you just try to go back. And a lot of the time my hunts were filmed, so I would go back and watch them again. And what could I have done differently? And then I kept a logbook, and I think that's the difference between even great tournament archers and good archers. And it's the difference between great bow hunters and mediocre bow hunters, or just maybe even above average bow hunters, is keeping those logbooks of the situations that you were in, how they worked, the deer or the elk, whatever it is you're hunting, their reactions. I review those notes pretty regularly, which sounds crazy. It's like my little black book, but it's really thick. And it has a lot of information, especially when it comes to like public lands and environments and where I've caught deer, mature bucks bedding at, where I've jumped them at. I've written all that down, and I could start to over several years. It wasn't, like at one season I could figure this out by any means, but over time I would start to understand that, okay, they prefer this, and this element. And if I go and make that element as I was managing those farms, I would start to create those environments and replicate almost those exact same behaviors. And the same thing with the calling. It's a lot of note taking, which I know in today's phones, it's so easy just to type stuff in your phone. But for whatever reason, if you write it down, your ability to remember how to react to that and what happened in the past is infinitely more precise to me and produces better results than if I just typed in my phone or tried to go back and find it on my phone somewhere.
Yeah, I'll definitely vouch for that, man. I'm a youth minister part-time, and a lot of times I'll be, writing a lesson or whatever, and if I type it up on my phone or on the computer, I got to look at my notes all the time. But if I write it, and I can write the whole thing and then not have to look at it because I wrote it. It's amazing what writing can do for your memory. And that's not even what we're going to talk about at all, but it's just, it's cool because guys like you who have been there and done it are who it's valuable to talk to, because you have all these little sweet tips that, just
you would never think about.
You'd never learn, you might learn it, 10 years down the road, but one of the big things, I guess the purpose that media serves, especially like podcasts or magazines or whatever it might be, is to try to lessen the learning curve, right? That's kind of like what people are all trying to do, is trying to do that, but at the same time, I guess, connect hunters together. And there's a lot of good purposes for it, but, we're talking about learning here. And that's kind of what's going to be one of my questions for you, and you've kind of explained it a little bit, but it sounds like you really did just kind of do like a guess and check method for if this stuff, really did work, the super aggressive calling tactics, or did you have did you test it on, pin deer some to where you can kind of, test things a little bit faster, or was it really like a 10 or 15 year process to where you could perfect it?
You would think that you think I could say that, having been married to someone whose dad owns a bunch of deer, for 12 years, that I would be able to tell you oh yeah, we went out back and had lunch and talked all the time. I don't think I ever blew a call or anything. What I did learn, I would say that one of the things that started me way ahead of the curve was, and some people would crucify me for this, but while I met those guys in Illinois, I had the opportunity, and I've only done it once, but I've had the opportunity to hunt deer in a high fence with Jack Brittingham. And at the time, he had high fenced an area by Macomb, Illinois, that's called Briarwood Ranch, and it's, I mean, I know shooting deer in a fence probably is a lot taboo to people, but here's the thing that I learned, and I don't have any desire to do that ever again, honestly, but when I got in that environment. You know, we drove through these gates, and there's obviously this awesome ranch house, and I had a cool guy named Chad, and he would sit in the stand with me, and we would see 15 and 20 bucks a day, and he'd be like, that one's 3.5, that one's 2.5, that one's 6.5, that one's 5.5, because they catalog these things.
Yeah.
And he's videoing, taking pictures the entire time. And I really learned how to age deer. That was probably one of the biggest things. With that aging process, I saw a whole lot of vocalizations, which was odd because and maybe he did, but I don't remember him ever saying really anything about how deer were reacting or interacting with each other. And at the time, I was like, hey, hands off, whatever he tells me to shoot, I'm going to shoot. Well, it took like 9 days to kill one of like 50 deer in a 2,000-acre enclosure. You would think it'd be easy, but it wasn't. But I learned so much about the way deer reacted to each other in that time period that I could start to put that together with the vocalizations and what I could get away with and what I couldn't get away with when, and why deer do certain things, may not be as black and white as you could hope for, but you can sure make it from pretty gray and smoggy to pretty crisp and clear on the edges. And I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but that was a big part of the learning curve for me. And then over the course of the next, I would say 10 plus years, it was trial and error with mature deer. And the hard thing was, I think the one thing that people can't quite get over is they see a deer bigger than anything they've ever shot, or a buck of an older age structure than they've ever seen. They're so scared to not get a shot opportunity that they won't take the opportunity to let for that opportunity to pass, to learn from what they've encountered.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's, I'm sorry, I'm probably not explaining that well.
That makes
No,
sense.
you perfectly described myself, because that's straight up. I've told Tyler that before. I just do not have the confidence, and it's so strange because I'll just blow a elk's brains out, battling in a bugle. That's fine, but you come back here and you whitetail hunt, and it's just, I don't know.
Quiet.
There's something to it. You got to be quiet. You don't want to spook them. You don't want to do the wrong thing, and maybe it's because a lot of times we're hunting in high-pressured environments where you might only see a target buck once or twice a year, so you don't want to mess it up. But if you take the risk and learn the right way to do it, you're not messing it up. You're making it better for yourself, and
Even
that's kind of
the
the
future
point.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really hard because you got to let that one walk, because you don't know what. Here's the thing: is some Batman movie or something. There's some. I know it is Batman. It's the Joker laughing about something. Somebody was going to kill the Batman. He said, "Don't kill him, or you're not going to learn nothing."
Yeah.
If you stick that animal, the game's over. Your learning process is done. Whether you kill them or not, it doesn't matter. It's done. So are you willing to watch those things unfold in the name of learning a lot of things to increase your odds of replicating or changing behavior that you're doing in order to change deer behavior? Most people are not willing to do that, and if it happens, it usually happens by accident. And I think if people can if folks get their head, even if you're hunting in super high pressured areas, I call deer in all the time. Iowa, Illinois, highly pressured areas, Missouri. It doesn't, with the exception of being far down south in like Texas. There are certain deer that are very susceptible depending on their mood, and some of them are just their natural behavior or tendencies. There are certain deer that you'll see, and I know you guys, I guarantee you guys have gone through this before, trying to isolate one deer. You've probably seen some deer that big deer that like being around other deer, and then there are some big deer that don't want anything to do with other deer, and some are vocal, some are not, and so you have to really watch a lot of body language and how they respond to certain calls, because usually blowing on a grunt call, a simple, as people call it, contact grunt, just a simple brack, that isn't going to freak them out to the point they're going to run away. But when you see them and you see them swivel your ears to it, but they keep doing what they're doing, well, they don't really care. So that deer, probably because he has almost no response to that whatsoever, other than he acknowledged that he heard me, that deer to me, I'm probably not going to talk a lot to at all. And it's the same with elk. Honestly, I've killed way better elk not blowing a bugle than what I have with any bugle, cow call, or any other sort of thing, because I hunt a lot of high pressured areas. And those those older bulls, once they hit 8, 9 years old, dude, they've seen it and heard it all. And unless you're like Corey Jacobson of, Elk 101, man, dude, I don't got those skills. I'm just not around those animals enough. So I keep it quiet and I slide in, and most of mine I kill spot and stock like that. But with whitetails, you're fixed to location in a tree, and if you don't learn how to communicate them and what you can get away with and what you can't, you're in trouble. I mean, you're just playing dumb luck, and I don't know. I don't like luck at all.
Me neither.
It doesn't fall on our side very often.
Yeah, that elk tag I told you about is the only time I've never won a Red Ryder BB gun in a freaking gun raffle in my life.
I'm telling you, this is why I brought that up earlier to you. I was like, I feel like it don't matter how many chances I have. I'm not going to draw that thing.
Yeah. And to make it worse, like, I'm just like you, except it's the guy at my table that wins 2 or 3 while I'm sitting there. We're at Ducks Unlimited or something. This guy's got a Benelli in a Ithaca or something that he won. It's like, come on.
I'm not even joking to you. And there's a guy in Illinois, and I bet he's listening to Select Archery, Daryl Steinen. He has a guy in his shop, and he's a cool guy. We joke about, and there's a lot of cool guys there, but this one guy in particular is a funny dude that we're always joking with each other and harassing each other. And I literally there was a table full of tickets, and I think it was a Whitetail's dinner fundraiser. But I'm like, it was like one of the last things, and I'm like, here, have that one. I tossed it over across the table, and dude, that was the one that won the gun. He won a freaking Mossberg gun. I'm like, I give up. Holy cow. I had a winner and I gave it away.
There you go.
Like I said, there's always hope, man.
There is, man. Well, maybe your elk tag is like the turn of your life, From here on out, you're going to be the guy who wins it all. Well, hey, I'd like to get into a little bit of like the whitetail calling stuff, if that's cool with you. Some of like more the detailed stuff. So the reason that I got, turned on to what you do and all this aggressive calling tactic stuff is I watched one of the many Deer Society videos. It's that's on YouTube, and one in particular, I know you've killed a bunch of deer and we've talked about it, but it's just a sequence where pretty much you can see a mature buck in decently heavy timber who's following a doe, and most of us are like, okay, well, he's locked down, we're not going to mess with him, and somehow, some way, you coerce this buck into bow range and just smoke him. I mean, and he was just walking dead, like it was just so crazy to me that you could go through all these different calls like you would in, if you were good at elk calling, right? Like you just make a different variety, and you're doing things for each and every move, like when the deer turns away from you but his ears are still towards you, and like you got to be watching for all that stuff. It's just so crazy to me that you are actually able to put all that together. So can you maybe talk a little bit about like that scenario and why you do feel comfortable calling at that deer and how to make it work?
Yeah, and I remember the hunt you're talking about. Like we talked right before we got on the air here. To remember exact details for me is I've killed a lot of deer, but I mean exactly what happened there I'm not really sure. But I'm sure if I went back and reviewed it, probably the scenario. In fact, I'm sure it was a scenario. He was following a doe. And that doe wasn't receptive. And the reason I don't believe she was at all is because generally when I see mature bucks that are breeding does, if they are following a doe, there's a whole lot of posturing and there's a whole lot of courting that goes on between the both of them. Mm-hmm. And that doe had no signs of that. She was just walking. She didn't care whether that deer was behind him or not. I mean, maybe she did care somewhat, but she wasn't interested in him, and that's what made him vulnerable in that scenario. Mm-hmm. So when I'm sure I threw a grunt at him first, and that's my first gauge. Just a simple, people call it, you come up with names for all these grunts, and I don't know that all of them are accurate, but like a simple contact grunt, as someone would say, just to see if he would respond and how he would respond. And when I did that, he had stopped and his ears perked up and he looked right over at me. And he was probably at that time 60, 70 yards, I'm guessing, if I can remember right. I shot a couple deer actually out of that area, but he was kind of on the other side of a four-wheeler trail that had gone through the timber, and there was not a lot of timber in that area. And when he turned and looked at me like that, when their ears go right at me, I know they've heard me, but their body language after that, whether they acknowledge me or not, Meaning, do they look at me? Do they square up to me? Are they going to start coming my direction? Did the hair go up on their back? All those things give me different clues of what may be going through his head. And I don't think that deer think like you and I do by any means. I don't think that wild animals have the capacity, or at least the animals we hunt, don't have the capacity to problem solve.
Sure.
But I do believe that they react. And so that, knowing that when I produce a sound or whatever it is that I do and I see a certain reaction, I mean, the reason I didn't grab my antlers to rattle was because why a deer's, I mean, he's following a doe, he's in love, let's just say, dude, he's not gonna, why would you come and fight? He doesn't want anything to do with that.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna rattle at him. Would I blow another doe call? He's kind of already got a girlfriend. He doesn't care about that. Hit him with a grunt call just to see what his temperature is, and he responds, like, looks over at me. That tells me probably there's been other bucks that have been with him on and off throughout that process of following that doe, and it was November 6th. The time of the year plays a lot into that. I think it was November 4th or 6th, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me, they're not quite breeding. There was probably quite a bit of fighting that he's been involved with at the same time, and maybe he's won some of those battles or whatever, but coming over out of aggression wasn't going to help. What I had to do was create a scenario of a hot doe that was in estrus with a buck that was right on her, because even as creating if I just let out the doe call itself, and I don't have a lot of variations of that, to be honest with you, but letting out a bleat in itself wouldn't necessarily bring him over, because you got to remember, like, if you're I bring a lot of analogies with guys in bars, so I hope I don't offend people, but that's how it works.
Yeah, sure.
So, I mean, if you've got a hot girl and you're sitting at one end of the bar and another girl comes in, even if she's smoking hot, you've already engaged the one you're talking to at the one end of the bar. You're not going to get up and go over and talk to that one. Well, you can, but someone else is going to go talk to the other girl. So, but for whatever reason, dudes, especially when there's competition, it's like a shiny fishing lure for whatever reason. Ooh, shiny! I want to head over to that one.
Mm-hmm.
And when you induce a competition for one that's actively ready to breed, well, this girl's not going to sleep with me tonight, so that one's going to sleep with somebody, it looks like. And that's that. In that scenario specifically, that's what happened.
Yeah.
I know I'd grunted, and I couldn't tell you the series of grunts, but I'm sure I got more vocal, more aggressive as he started to approach me. And I can remember that deer sitting there, making a scrape, starts making a scrape, and then you can see the anger, hair goes up on his back, and he's getting very aggressive. So in that scenario, that worked. It may not work in the next scenario like that. If that doe was in heat, there's probably nothing I could really do.
Sure.
But he was on her for sure, wanting to breed, and I just, based on her movements through the timber, I don't think she had any interest in that whatsoever. She just wasn't ready.
Mm-hmm. In that sequence, you did something called a breeding grunt. That's what you called a breeding grunt. And that's not really something I'm too familiar with. It sounded like a really long, drawn out, growly grunt. Is that something that you had heard animals do in the wild and then replicated?
Yeah, so it would have been probably before that. I bet it was a good 5 or 6 years before that. I was hunting in Iowa, and I've heard it in several places since then. In Kansas, I've heard it in Illinois and Wisconsin. I was sitting. One of the things I've learned is that I don't hunt where other people hunt hardly at all, especially when I'm hunting public areas and where there's other pressure, because pretty much people are very habitual, way more than what they think. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I'm mapping out a piece of public land that I'm going to hunt, I find the parking areas and I walk every square inch. I don't care what I bump. One time I walk that whole area right before I start hunting and find every tree stand I can. And I take the map that has a trail system, and inevitably, almost every time, those people follow those trails in the easiest route they can to get to the tree stands. Mm-hmm. So when I map all that out, I try to find those areas where people don't go. One of the places that people don't go, even in a lower pressured state like Iowa, is they won't hunt wide open CRP fields. Deer don't really care whether it's wide open CRP or whether it's thick timber. They're kind of indifferent to it. I mean, they like the edge habitat a lot, but other than that, boy, I mean, they can live in a wide open bean field for days. And so I was sitting there. There was one little spit of timber that came out of a timber block, and I was actually I was on kind of a little bit of a pointer draw that went on out in there about 75 or 100 yards. And at the end, towards the end of that, it was rubbed to live in daylights year after year after year, and I wasn't on any quality deer at the moment. And so I thought, I'm going to go out there and just see, because I can see a long ways and just see what I see. And I was set up. It was probably, it was 75 to 100 yards from where those rubs were, where I was in a stand, and it was a small tree. And I was sitting there, and I'd rattled a couple times, rattled a couple small bucks in, nothing else really happened. About 11 o'clock, a pretty good mature buck that was, I think he was 160-ish, I'd say.
Pretty good. Pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good one. He was I would guess, if I guess his age, I would say he was probably 5-6 year old deer. And he had walked in to the timber probably about 50 yards from me, and I could have, this is one of those examples, I could have shot him right there, no problem. And in fact, I think he got close to her at a couple different points, and he just kind of milled around. He made a couple scrapes, and I'm going to sit back and watch this. It's kind of cool. And I didn't have a cameraman with me at the time. I was just hunting all on my own. And that deer, after he made some scrapes, he rubbed a few trees, and he stood there for a while and almost motionless for about 5 or 6 minutes. Maybe it was longer than that. And he let out this big, long, drawn-out, deep, guttural grunt that it was pretty impressive to watch. I may have heard it, but never registered it as that was a deer that did that.
Yeah.
And he did it again, maybe 30 seconds later, and then he just stood there motionless. And within 3 to 5 minutes at most, he never moved a muscle, never twitched, nothing. A doe came in from the CRP, and he bred the doe. And then the doe left.
Unreal.
And he laid down. And I'm like,
Wow.
It wasn't, maybe 20 minutes went by, because I was like, I'm not getting up. And this is like noon or 1 at this point. Well, maybe it was close to noon, I guess. That deer got back up, and he kind of stretched a little bit and rubbed a tree a little bit, and just let this big, long, drawn-out grunt again. He did it 3 or 4 times. And like almost like unbelievably, such a weird sound to me, having not really recognized it before. It was like, man, that's something, that's weird. Real long, drawn out, deep, 8 to 10 seconds, like I said, and did 3 or 4 of them. And pretty soon here comes, now I can't tell you whether it's the same doe or not, but here comes in a doe. Comes into the whole little finger there, and he breeds her. She walks off, and he lays back down. And I'm like, holy freak. That's pretty cool. Like, I'm like, I gotta go try that.
No kidding.
At a bar.
Yeah, that's how you get thrown out of the bar, actually.
Exactly. That's how the fights happen.
Get cut off.
No, but I logged that in my head, and I just kept replaying it, and it actually happened one more time that day. And I just
with the same buck or a different buck?
Same buck.
Okay.
That buck never left that timber until it was about 20 minutes before dark, and he got up and he walked on out in the CRP, and then he was chasing does around, which was bizarre. So I just thought about it a bunch, and and this is an older guy. I don't know, you guys may or may not know the name. I'm sure he's was kind of a legend, at least in Pennsylvania. Ray I for turkeys. And
yes.
I was somewhere where Ray had done a seminar or something, and he mentioned something to me that I really hadn't heard for a long time. Was that the trouble with people in Turkey calling in gobblers that they don't understand is their reversing nature. A bird gobbles and hens come to him, and I kind of started thinking about that. And I wonder if that's how it works with deer. So I started it, and sure enough, I could call in does at specific times of the year. But the first time I used it on a deer that was really mature, 6+ years old, that dude came in like a hurricane. I mean, he was ready to go. I mean, he came running down a timbered lane straight to me, and it stopped, and he let out one of those longer grunts, and then he started getting more aggressive. And the grunts were, instead of just being a brr or a longer, it wasn't like it was different than breeding because it had aggression at the end of it. He would let a longer one, but at the end it would just go, I mean, just getting more aggressive, almost not like a dog barking, but getting very vocal.
So
I don't know how to say that.
It's a lot like, okay, so we actually had Corey Jacobson on the podcast last year around this time. And, Corey talks a lot about your voice inflection and your emotion in the elk call. It's the same thing with whitetail.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. 100%.
Wow, that is cool. And to be honest, the hair on my arm is a little bit standing up right now because I'm so juiced about that, the way you're talking about this. And so, okay, so yeah, you kind of talked about it there, but like the next progression is like, how do bucks react to that normally? Like, is it like oh man, he's got a gal that's coming, so I'm going to go steal it, or is every buck, or are they different?
Well, so that depends on several things. One, it depends on the age class of that deer that you're trying to call over.
Mm-hmm.
It depends on seemingly your buck to doe ratio. If you have lower numbers of does to bucks, the field of play, it's like walking in a bar with one girl and 4 guys, or walking in the bar with 40 girls and 4 guys.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally different dynamic there.
Sure.
So that has to be in place. And then the other, if I haven't said yet, the time of the year, if it's post rut wherever you're at, that is a very powerful tool. Very, very powerful. Early, before the rut, it seems like it's almost worthless.
Uh-huh.
And then during the rut, maybe you get lucky, it works out a little bit, maybe not so much. But like when that buck was following that doe in that example you're talking, that was for us, that was, November 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. That's
the
smack dab in the middle of the rut. Yeah, maybe earlier depending on the weather. And in that case, I think it was a very cool day. I think it was a lot cooler than what normally would have been for that time of year.
Mm-hmm.
So things might have been a little advanced. I'm not big into the moon phase, but the weather I am quite a bit. And then the age structure of that deer itself, if he's an older deer, and I would guess, I'm venturing to say, I really don't know, but I would assume that if he's an older deer in that area that generally is a dominant deer, he's more than likely to come over too.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's one of the places where you would apply it. Another place is when I hunt river bottoms a lot. I find a lot on river bottoms, a lot. And when I say river bottoms, I don't mean like Mississippi river bottoms, but, rivers that are creeks that are 15, 20, 30 foot wide. Maybe they get a little wider at times.
Mm-hmm.
Those drainages, those bucks will run those for a long distance. And I think that's where a lot of your bucks, some bucks they're just like humans. Some are very transient. Some are they're homebodies and they just don't go very far. Some, when they shed their velvet, they start getting their butts whooped and they disappear. Some change their food sources, move into another area, and they come in conflict with other deer and they move again. So, like for me, I don't really worry a whole lot about unless it's a big chunk of private land that I manage. I don't worry a whole lot about what I find on my cameras until I get to about that second week of September.
Mm-hmm.
And, I know I've gone circles here with the vocalization and everything else, but you would never do something like that in early October. You're not going to pull it off. I mean, maybe if you did, it'd be a miracle. I just haven't seen it personally.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing I base my knowledge off is what I've seen personally. I just, from a hunting perspective, there's a lot of great guys out there have a lot of really good information, but I only believe nothing of what I see and half of what I hear.
Right.
Or vice versa. Half of what I see, nothing of what I hear.
Yeah, there you go.
And that's the way it rolls with communication. But you got to take notes, and you remember those things, visit those notes over the next year. Like, so if you did something in the first week of November, provided you have the same weather conditions the next year, that'll probably work in the same scenario. But if you don't have that deer there, it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have to be where deer are in order to kill a deer. And that's another bizarre thing I see with people is that they don't take into account the inventory of deer that are in their area whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
If you're hunting public lands and you're bouncing around, you're hoping for some good luck on a river corridor or something like that, that's a different deal. But if you're trying to, to really understand communication with deer that are fairly local and learn how they react to you and how they're going to react the next time you see them, because what works on a deer, amazingly enough, from what I've seen, that works on them when they're 3 years old will work on them even better when they're 5 and 6 years old.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which a lot of people, I'm sure, would disagree with that, but unless they have a really bad experience, I don't see a conditioned response to where they want, if they react to one thing in one way, they'll react to it again later on too.
So this may be just a touch off subject. We just we just can visit it for a sweet second right here. But you were mentioning how deer are using river corridors, and I have some personal interest in this. If that river corridor has a pretty wide patch of timber around it, are they still, like thick timber, you see deer still moving up and down that river or creek system, like in really close proximity to the water source? Or will they, I know they'll filter out here and there, but like, are you still seeing that pattern? Because I know in some areas that I've hunted, a river system or a creek corridor, maybe a bunch of cottonwoods, and then outside of that, it's sagegrass or CRP or whatever it might be, or crop fields. And so, they're going to stay up and down that thing. But what if the timber is like a half mile wide or a quarter mile wide?
So in general, what I've noticed in scenarios like that is my best setups and my best luck in those kind of environments are not at all within that timbered environment. It seems like a lot of does will stay in there, and this is going to parallel elk hunting somewhat. In younger bucks, you'll see regularly in there, and again, you can't take into account what you're seeing now on your game cameras, and even up until about the second week of October. The only reason I use the cameras is just to identify what I have. If you're using it to base on what you've seen in those blocks of timber, and you're going to try to hunt based off of that, I don't think you'll have much success, with the exception of if you have a water source that's inside that timber somewhere. And for whatever reason, and I don't get it, but whitetails in general do not like to drink out of flowing, nice, clean, clear water. They would rather drink out of a muddy timber hole in the middle of the timber, especially older bucks. So, like when I was in my management stuff, I was managing almost 8,000 acres at one time, maybe a little more than that, in several different states. Boy, food plots were cool, but one of the most intense tools that I had was building a water hole somewhere in the timber where it was secluded, and a lot of my whitetails would drink out of that. And that's one exception I could find where I could kill those deer. Outside of that, in a scenario like you're describing, I probably would hunt small fingers of timber if possible off of those creek drainages, 100, 200, 300 yards down. I don't see where mature bucks, I can't really find a direct correlation between mature bucks spending time in the open, provided there's no roads right there, versus timber.
Right.
And in fact, it seems like, a lot of the deer I wind up killing and I see frequently are deer that are not generally in the timber a whole lot. And the only accounting I can give for that, or whatever reasoning I guess you could say, is in my head, I guess there's a lot of competition in there, bucks and does, because when you start feeding deer like we've done here in Iowa, trying to get bigger antlers, which I still have seen like almost no proof of that whatsoever, but we've poured pallets and pallets of mineral and feed into deer in our areas in the Midwest, and not seen a bunch of antler growth. But one thing you will find is that most of those mature bucks will not come in those feeders at all. You'll get glimpses of them on the outside of those feeders, but they generally don't come up and eat at the feeder unless they're by themselves. Usually. Yeah. And so I don't think, as they get older, I just don't think a whole lot of bucks, generally, even if they had a tendency to be really social, I think they kind of become antisocial. So it's hard to not hunt areas that have a ton of sign like that. Like I'm sure there is in that little block of timber. Right. But man, I just do so much better consistently on mature buck. I don't see as many deer as what I normally do, but as what you would in the timber. But outside of that, in those abnormal places, that's usually where I kill them, and it's a lot of times it's in the middle of the day.
Right. So in that, and if that water source is secluded, it can still be in the open, in CRP grass or something like that, and the deer visit it, or does it need to be? Go ahead.
No, if it's secluded from human traffic or any other pressure, that would be negative.
I got you.
I've seen them use open CRP fields, although we've never really dug one of those before on purpose. But I've seen them use that before quite a bit, especially a deer that doesn't like to be around other deer and in timber. He'll use that as his main water source rather than going to the creek.
That's interesting. Water sources kind of perplex me because we have a lot of water in a lot of the areas we hunt, and it's like, how do you choose this stock tank over that stock tank over that creek? But you talking about the flowing water, I'm guessing even if it's a slow flow, they would still prefer to be in that little hole somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, no humans around. Is that right?
Yes, the mature bucks will, and it's and you can really relate that. I mean, if you elk hunt, I know you said you do, but if people are listening, elk hunt much. The guys who get the most successful trail camera pictures, they're not on those water tanks environments, even where there's low amounts of water. If there's a wallow somewhere, generally, I mean, I'll get, if I'm running trail cameras, which I don't do a lot of, I'll find that water source that's up above there somewhere, a seep where there's not any other traffic. I'll get a lot of animals into that water hole itself, where there's a ton of tracks around. I get lots of images, but I don't get a lot of big bulls in there. And it's the same way with whitetails. Like when I build one of those in areas where there's a ton of deer, like timber for the most part, you'll see a ton of tracks around there. But if it's close to a source, like an open field, a big CRP field type thing, where there's not a whole lot of, in theory, other critters running around their deer, specifically, they'll use that one that's in that corner of that timber if there's nothing out there in CRP, and if there's something in CRP, they'll just use it.
Yeah.
Huh. So I don't know how what exactly triggers that, other than maybe it's just years of going to that big wallow or going to that big water source and getting arrows flung at you that doesn't work out.
Yeah, no kidding.
And I'd say even too on those river corridors, by the way, like if you're hunting one, even out west, it's really apparent, but those bucks generally don't, when I say they run the rivers, just to be clear, they don't generally run right along the river. They're usually 100 yards out from that river, and they're hitting those fingertips of little timbers that come out and brush piles that come out, and every once in a while they'll sneak in, but for the most part, they're not walking within 100 yards of that timber. So, again, it comes down to almost like, you could map it. I think, I know I've heard Randy Newberg talk about it with elk, where how he finds elk is a lot in the same way where I wind up with my whitetail hunts, is you pattern, or not pattern, but you draw out a map, like a park map if you're hunting a public land, and if you draw those routes through those tree stands that you've marked off, and then kind of start blowing them up, make them wider and wider and wider, you'll find little pockets where there's nothing. And OnX Maps has a feature that's just like that with human traffic, I believe, or trails or roadways, where you can get on and look at the same thing. It's the same principle as elk, just applying it to deer, and it works, I mean, just as well. If there's a buck that I find that I want to kill, even if I've got a nighttime picture at 3 o'clock in the morning, if I can find that area where he's never pressured, even if it doesn't have trees in it, that's probably where I'm going to have to figure out how I'm going to kill him. I'm going to have to figure something out. But
that's cool.
Yeah.
So how often are you calling blind?
When I don't have a target buck, for sure, I do it quite a bit. And I'll call, every 15, 20 minutes, especially with the antlers. And that, again, this is time of the year dependent. So for me anymore, I don't generally hunt whitetails until about October 25th.
Really?
By then, I usually find a deer that I want to kill. And if I haven't found a deer, boy, it doesn't go well for me unless it's just complete luck, which I told you I don't have much of.
Right.
So, I mean, if I don't find one by then on any of my cameras on the public lands, wherever I'm scouring, or if it's private ground even, the odds of one showing up are low. And if they do show up, they're coming through and moving somewhere else. They're a transient deer, or they belong somewhere else and somehow they got sidetracked. But if you see a big deer and it's November 5th and you've never seen that deer before, I've done it before where I've climbed down out of my tree stand to go kill that daggum thing, because you'll never see it again. Never. I'm sure there's exceptions to that. There's exceptions to everything.
Well,
but
I have an exception, except I still never climbed down out of the tree stand. I was hunting a big, mature East Texas buck on public land, which we don't get a ton of those. They get shot pretty quick, And somebody ended up killing this deer. He's in high 150s, which is a giant for around here. And I watched this deer. I think I hunted quite a bit in a 9-day span, which in our rut, which would be kind of more like the early December time period. And I saw this deer go bed in the middle of a CRP field 5 different days. And I did not have enough sense to climb down out of the tree stand and go over there. And it's just like, you look back now, and it's just all part of the learning process, which we talked about earlier, but
yep.
I'll just look back and like, my gracious, the second day I saw him do that, I should have went right there, like, what was I doing? But it's just kind of crazy.
Yeah, if you see do something day after day during that time of year, by all means, make a move.
Mm-hmm.
But man, if you just see a new deer that shows up that you've never seen before, the odds of that deer being a resident deer or showing up again are very low in my experience. So I usually try to make some kind of a play on him. Even if it means crawling down out of the daggum sand to go kill him, whatever I got to do.
Yeah, man.
That's cool.
I'm going to try to adopt that principle as much as I can. And it's this whole, just being timid, because that's what we've been taught for forever. Be gingerly, be careful. You don't want to blow them out, Well, if you never kill the deer, what good did it do?
Right.
So I don't know. I think that there's a lot to be learned from kind of the whole, and it's funny how we didn't end up for this to be a parallel to elk hunting kind of podcast, but it really has been, because it's crazy how much you can learn by like, going up there and hunted like heavily pressured elk and realize you got to cover a bunch of ground, hit all the places you can that nobody else is willing to go. And whitetail are, a lot of the same way,
Yep.
and really like, we see it here at least, but if you go to a place and try to do some blind calling or call a deer that get hunted quite a bit, man, it can be really rough. You have to be saying the exact right thing before you can get any response out of them at all. I mean, we've last year Tyler and I sat in a place, one of our honey holes, where we had not seen people, and suddenly one morning here comes the headlamps coming in 20 minutes late, and we're like, oh no. And then the guys, I'm sure had been watching some really cool TV show and sat down and rattled nonstop for 3 hours straight, not stopping without a response from a deer, and it's like, man, it's just not the place and time for it, and it's so key that you do kind of what you've been telling us, where you actually make sure it's the right time of year in the right situation. You're seeing, the deer's body language and all that, and that's stuff that I'm really trying to learn. I'm so glad we actually got to talk to you about this stuff. But
yeah,
go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, yeah. I mean, a lot of that goes back to testing the waters thing, like we were talking about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it's November 2nd and you've got no response from a grunt tube after, I will throw out vocalizations and I'll rattle at deer that are right there in front of me, provided they can't see me. Like if their eyes are behind the tree,
mm-hmm.
I will, and they're close under 100 yards, I'll call at them, and I'll see what their temperature is. If I'm getting no response after trying that 2 or 3 times, whether it's rattling or calling or whatever it is I'm doing, dude, I'm done. I mean, there's no reason to try it anymore.
Yeah, sure.
So, I think that's where maybe some of the confusion comes in too, because you watch TV shows, you watch a show like what you watched with me kill that one deer. I mean, dude, that's not an everyday occurrence by any means.
Yeah, sure.
But
and it's awesome that you can realize that. Like the fact that you did it and you can still realize like that makes you legit, man. That's awesome. Yeah, that is cool.
Yeah, it's the TV world, what happens on TV and what happens on Instagram, and I should say not much Instagram, but one of the things I realized is that when we started Deer Society, that was one of the things that I wanted to do was, let's just start making Facebook Live videos.
Yeah.
And, dude, nobody wanted anything to do with that. I'm like, I will. I don't care. I mean, dude, it doesn't work every time when you blow on a call. It's just, everything has to, they have to be in the right mood and the right situation, the right time of year and the right time of day and the weather conditions. All those play factors into that, and sometimes you're wrong.
Yeah.
And last year I did quite a bit of that, where I would just jump on Facebook Live. I'm like, all right, there's a deer out there, and see what he's feeling today. And there was one deer that it wasn't a big deer, maybe a 1.5 or 2.5-year-old deer, and he was out there with some does, and I'd heard him once, pretty kind of deep, shallow, short grunt, and I hit him with a grunt, and he answered back. And he'd stop and he'd look at those does and he'd grunt at me, and then he'd take off after them again and following them grunting. And I turned on my phone, put it all on Facebook Live right there, and you can see the deer coming down, making all kinds of racket. Dude, he was ready to breed. Like now,
that's cool.
He was super hyper aggressive.
That's cool.
You can go back to it last year and find that video, man. It was, for me anyways, I mean, I don't have a gazillion followers, I don't have a TV show or nothing like that, but there's a lot of people sharing that video pretty fast.
That's cool.
And it's live, it's real, that's what's happening. And along with that, like, man, when you press live, sometimes things don't go your way. So
I know it.
It's really hard for some people to swallow that pride and think, or I shouldn't say pride, but to take that pill of chance and just go, man, this might work out or it might not work. Hey, y'all watch this kind of deal.
Yeah. But that's fun, man.
Sometimes it doesn't, but to me, I think it's so cool when that stuff does work. There's a lot of bucks I did last year, I think, where I did some live feeds where, I was communicating with deer, and you could sometimes see them communicate back. Sometimes I would tell you what they're going to do, like, hey, I feel like this deer is going to do this if I do this kind of a grunt at it, and I do it, and sure enough, you see it do it, and 90% plus of the time, I feel like I've got it down. I mean, I don't have any doubt if I do what I feel like I've seen done before in the past, and I feel like these things are all in place, and I don't sweat doing it at all. And most of the time it works out for me, but it wasn't always that way. It was at one time it was 1%, and then over a couple of years it became 10%, and then pretty soon it was 30%, and now it's probably 90% of the time. I look at a deer and tell you what kind of mood it's in and what it's about to do and how you can maybe influence it, or if you can't.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's cool. You should make an app for that.
Well, I wish I could. I really, and I get a ton of messages, man. I'll be sitting there, and especially in November, my Facebook message thing just lights up like crazy. People, what should I do? I've got this buck that just did this, and I heard this and that happened. And I'm like, dude, I'm not there.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I don't know. I would start by getting off your phone.
No kidding.
Throwing it out there.
Watch the deer. That's cool, man. Well, I know that you like to be able to do all this, and I don't mean for this to be like a product placement thing or anything, but do you have a call that you're really confident in making all this stuff with, or are there a couple out there, or like, I'm sure you can't just go buy the cheapo at Walmart and do all this stuff with it.
Well, the main thing is the one I use, and I don't get paid by those guys at all, so don't confuse it with like a product placement thing for sure.
Yeah,
but the one that is the easiest for me to use, I've been using forever, is that Illusion makes it. It's called the Extinguisher. And that call, because of the way that I can quickly change that tone pretty accurately, meaning like if I want to move it to a certain spot on there, and I think it has a fawn, doe, and buck on there. So if I wanted to move it to the line where the doe and the fawn split, and I blow on that, that's going to sound pretty much like the same way. But it's a lot like we were talking before, where your voice is different than my voice, but it's how you say what you're saying that's important. So I can feel like I can manipulate that a little bit better with that call than what I can with a lot of other calls, and I can go back to that same tone if I want to by sliding to that same spot. That being said, boy, that takes a lot of years to really learn, honestly. But it's more even, most of the time I have that thing set on. It's not quite all the way the deepest setting I can. It's about 3/4 of the way up. I think it says doe to buck, and it's about 3/4 of the way up to buck. And that's usually where I start. And it's almost all the time I start with a simple just to see what happens. And sometimes, like on some videos, you'll see me go bark, 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 bark. Well, it's because if you're watching the video, the deer hasn't turned its ears and it hasn't heard me yet. And most of the time, that deer walking through the timber, they're walking those leaves. It's like being alongside a stream. I mean, if you're 100 yards from the stream, you can hear somebody talk clear as day. But if you were on that stream, sitting right next to the person, you couldn't hardly hear them talk.
Right. Yeah, sure.
So, but once I get an acknowledgement, once I see that ear spin towards me, and then from there, that's what that reaction, whatever happens, that ear turns towards me. That gives me my next clue what I'm going to do next.
Mm-hmm. So,
and that's where people need to start taking notes.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to take some notes on this podcast after we're done, for real. But so would you say that calling is a tool in your arsenal, or would you say that calling is the way you kill deer?
I would say it's part of a tool. It's a tool in a toolbox type thing. Like I start with, so this year I've got, I guess this is kind of a plug. This year I've got, I just called it the image capture system, and I've been doing it for a little while, and it's it's biological, a scrape activator is what I call it, just because you're trying to come up with some cool catchy names, but it's got that in it, and it's got another part to it that's a limb activator, which that scent is pretty strong and goes a long ways. And from what I've seen with it tends to lend itself to deer wanting to really rub their nose and their face, their preorbital glands all over that stick, just like they're making a scrape. I make a mock scrape with it. Mm-hmm. And I'll set out, so this is how my season starts. I'll set out, you can get like 20 sets out of a unit, and I'll set out 20 sets on a piece of public ground that may be 300 acres, which sounds like a lot. But the next day I'll go do that somewhere else, and the next day I'll go do that somewhere else. Now, I realize not everybody has a gazillion cameras, but I'll go back and pick up those cameras and I'll rotate those. So about once a week, I'll come back or leapfrog would be a better name. I'll come back and grab those cameras and see if there's any bucks on there that I want to kill. Most of the time, I feel like I get an image of the deer I want to kill. And if I don't have a deer I want to kill, then I just scratch that one off the list. Because even in Iowa, a lot of people don't understand how much public land there is. There's a lot. And, OnX Maps, not a sponsor. But those guys, dude, that thing, it's not always accurate either, especially in states like Iowa where land ownership on smaller tracts changes a lot. But you can find tracts of public land that say state of Iowa on them, and other areas that may not quite be marked on some of the Iowa public maps because you might have an older publication. Yeah. And in Iowa, we're picking up public ground. I mean, it's not like out in the West where, they're losing some of their public lands. Our state actually buys public land, or buys land and turns it public in a lot of cases. Mm-hmm. So I'll blanket those 300-400 acre tracts, whatever it is. Sometimes it's a 40 acre tract. I may only have 5 cameras on a 40 acre tract, but I put those things everywhere that I feel like deer are going to come into and out of that track, because again, I'm not necessarily looking for deer that are in the core of that, because I know that there are going to be other hunters in there, and there's other tree stands hung in there. There's going to be a lot of traffic in the center of that for sure. Mm-hmm. So, or towards the back of it, because everybody else wants to go to the back now. Suddenly everybody's a CrossFit guy, and they're going to, I don't know, run over logs and crawl underneath something and roll down through the stream and pop in their stand. It's weird. So I know I cross that off right away, and I cross off the middle of it. Uh-huh. And then those other areas are where I focus all my cameras. And then once I find a good deer, my hunt's going to start usually that last week of October. If I haven't found one yet, I keep going into that process until about the second week of November. After that, if I haven't found something, then I get really nervous. I struggle to find something after that. But once I find a deer and I'm onto them, then I start pulling out the maps and I start looking at everything I can, especially other hunting pressure, because I hunt a lot of public ground now. Mm-hmm. And I look at all the entry points in and out of that public ground, and I'll talk to neighbors. And in Iowa, we have another thing that we can do that's completely legal. You can spotlight deer up until I think there's a time limit till like 11 o'clock, and in a lot of other states you can too. You can't have any weapons in the truck, but you can spotlight deer. So I'll cruise a lot of areas too. That's the other way I'll find a lot of them, is I'll spotlight a lot of fields, and usually I've learned pretty much when the times to do that are best, because I don't want to draw a lot of attention when I'm out there spotting, because usually you'll get pulled over because people don't generally do it here in Iowa. But I'll find those times of the day, or the weather patterns that are most like hot, humid days. Most of those bucks are in bean fields. So I'll be checking the other bean fields to see if any of those deer that possibly are interested in, if any of those show up on a camera next to one of those public lands, then I'm on that deer. And then I'll go into that public land and I'll walk every square inch of that public land one time. And I'll find every tree stand. I put those all on a map, and then I look at all the access points, and I just draw lines on those trails that go right to those tree stands. And if the trail doesn't go right to the tree stand, which a lot of them don't, they're usually 75, 100 yards off the trail, I just draw a line to wherever the easiest access from here to there is, either on the contours or if there's a trail there, just draw it up. And kind of like Randy Newberg does with the elk stuff, you'll hear on his podcast, just grow those lines out, and I can start finding those areas where there's probably not any people in. Mm-hmm. And that's where I'll go in and find a tree. I'll clear lanes. And in Iowa, depending on the ground, you may or may not be able to trim lanes. Mm-hmm. So sometimes you've got to tie it off with twine. And I mark those on my GPS, actually on my cell phone now, because that's what I use most of the time is OnX Maps. I'll just mark it on there, and I'll go right into those areas in a different way than everybody else has gone into them, meaning I cut across trails, even if it's a pain in the butt, as long as I'm not sweating. I'll go in there and climb up those trees, and I'll hunt those once or twice, and that's it. I mean, if nothing shows up in there, and there's no sign of life in there, I'm going somewhere else. If there is, I'll sit there 3 days straight all day long if I need to, or 4 days or 5 days, if the deer's worth it.
Right.
But that's where, it's, man, they're not in there all the time, or you'd see a bunch of sign. But if there's any indication that there's a deer using it, if there's a good sized rub in there, which doesn't always mean a big deer, I find a big track after I've identified there's a deer in that area, dude, I'm on it, and I'm gonna sit on it for a while,
right? And
it'll be from daylight till dark. And most of the time, I kill my deer in the middle of the day, especially in public areas.
Man, that's crazy. So, do you feel like, when you kill deer in the middle of the day like that, is it always in a certain situation, like near a bed, or could it be just a cruiser, or like what does that look like most of the time?
Most of the time, I'm usually near bedding areas, usually. But the thing is, a bedding area, as growing up whitetail hunting, I'm sure you have like an image of what a bedding area looks like in your head in certain areas of the country. That may not necessarily be what is a bedding area to a mature buck, a specific mature buck. Like, he may have learned right away, like, geez, dude, there's lots of deer there and there's lots of arrows flying by me. I'm not going to go over there. So, but if I come over here in this wide open, big white oak timber and sit up here on this knoll, I can see everything and nothing bothers me. And nobody's ever here because there's no deer trails here. I mean, I'm not saying he has that thought process, but that's what happens. There's no other deer to bother him. There's no people that bother him. He can see, people coming from a long ways off. You can see other predators, like, depending on where you're at, the coyotes or whatever. And dude, just, if they have the general rules that I found, rule of thumb kind of thing for where a mature buck will bed is usually he has to have something at his back. He'll usually bed if he's a deer that likes other deer, a social deer. He'll usually bed with other deer, but down, like if there's terrain, he'll usually bed about 3/4 of the hill, way down the hill from them. So, like, if you were walking in and jumped those deer and they took off, he's going to hear them take off from behind him way before you get there. And he'll either circle around or do something different. But he's got to have the wind at his back, and he's got to be able to see out in front of him. And it's got to be dry.
Yeah.
And with the exception of, Wisconsin, where you're hunting in frozen marshes, you're probably not going to find a whole lot of deer beds in wet environments. So that's pretty much it. I mean, you find them where they've got the wind at their back, they can see out in front of them. There's very little pressure whatsoever, and you've pretty much got opportunities. And if you mark those on your maps too, in conjunction with your stands and everybody else's stands, I mean, I don't even leave stands anymore. I take everything in with me on my back now, and I just I've got a slick setup that I've made with a Faro backpack. I pull the pack completely off, and I've got a lone wolf that I throw on my back, and on that lone wolf I throw some sticks, and man, I can get 30 foot up in the tree with 3 sticks if I need to, usually. And there's a bunch of videos you can look up on how to do that stuff other people have done.
That's cool, man.
Yeah,
that's a killer system. Yeah. Are you so, like, when you say you're killing them next to bedding, is that they're like what you assume is the buck's bedding?
Yeah, where I found beds, even in those open areas, you'll find a bed here and there on those ridges or knolls. Now, when you get into post rut, hunting inside of those beds becomes way more productive. But up until in our area, November 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, somewhere in there, the rut, I mean, You can read whatever predictors you want. I mean, the most activity of bucks chasing does is during that time period. And one of the ways I track that is I can call the police office where I'm at.
Yeah.
And I talk to the cops.
Yeah.
And when the car deer collisions start rising rapidly,
yeah,
it's on. And and the interesting thing about the rut to me all the time is, in my opinion, I think it happens all the time at the same time of the year, unless you're in, down south where it may be different. I don't know. I don't hunt Texas and Florida and Georgia, but if you're in an area where there's a pronounced rut like that, it's almost always the exact same days that become crazy productive. But at the same time, you'll also get those messages from all your buddies. Maybe you've been sitting there for 2 days and haven't seen a deer either, but you can get a message from your buddy who's sitting 400 yards away from you, telling you about all the bucks he's seen.
Oh, yeah.
The rut's on, man. And then you'll get 4 more messages from people going, what do I do? I haven't seen anything. Nothing's working.
Yeah.
Well, dude, there's like 6 bucks on one doe running, 100 yards away from you. You're over the wrong side of the ridge. Just the way it shakes. So,
that's crazy.
Anyways, I know I'm horrible with the ADHD route.
No, dude, that's great, man. I'm like taking notes over here, man. We've been looking at each other like, that was a good point, and that was a good point, and we need to do that. So that's awesome, man. I have one more question that's probably kind of a weird question, but is there anything about this, like you studying this body language and communication with these animals, that you've learned that you can use to like communicate with people better?
I've used it with other animals quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess in a way, but I haven't really like sat down and thought like, oh, that's just like that deer does.
Yeah.
But
he turned his ear towards me.
Yeah, well, I can see where you grab attention to somebody, in a good or bad way or whatever, and then you have a chance to talk to them. I guess, that's kind of sales and marketing too for a lot of guys. I never went to college for any of that or nothing, but I know, what little bit I've read or, heard from other people is, you study other people's, if you want them to react a certain way, you're watching to see what they do. If they cross their arms, you cross your arms kind of deal.
Right.
So I suppose I would relate, but I've never kept notes on that.
Sure. Yeah. I was just interested to see if that might have never found correlation there, but so
now you're gonna have me driving to a bar just to go talk to
studying people. Dude, why are you looking at me so much?
Hey, I said hey.
Yeah, exactly. So what's a good way for people to connect with you? Is it at CrossFit Rob on Instagram or?
Right. Yeah, log roller. No, you can connect with me at it's actually on my Instagram is Olympic Bow Hunter.
Okay.
Super easy. And then Facebook made it hard for me. Somebody stole Rod White and somebody stole Olympic Bow Hunter, I guess, a while ago.
Dang.
So it's Rod White Olympic Bow Hunter.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah. And then, And then, any questions they have or whatever. I mean, I do my best to answer, but my gosh, man, I get a lot of them. So nobody get offended if I don't get right back to you by any means. And especially come hunting season, man, I have more aerial maps hit my phone than I don't know. It's just crazy. You get tons of maps, people wanting to know how to do this or that or whatever. And I should maybe start using that as my resource to start hunting.
Yeah.
It's a good idea.
No kidding.
Can you send pictures of the deer with it?
Yeah.
Right.
Cool, man. Well, that's
so this
great.
deer was on which part of that farm in that trail camera picture?
No kidding.
Yep.
Well, that's awesome, man. I appreciate all your time, man. That was a great interview, and I hope you have good luck this fall, man. Send us some pictures.
Well, man, good luck to you guys, too, and it's awesome meeting you over the phone, and
Sure
we'll shake hands one day and shoot me some pictures of some of those slammers when you kill one.
We will, man. If we get them, we will definitely do that, so we'll be in touch,
Good
man.
luck this fall.
All right, dude. See ya.
See ya.
So you got one of those calls that he was talking about, right?
I did.
Yeah.
After
Exterminator or something?
Extinguisher, I think. I think it's Extinguisher grunt call.
Extirpated?
Yeah. It's got a little slidey thing on it. After this interview, I said, you know what, I'm going to get one of those. And I like it. I don't know how often I'm really going to use the function of the sliding back and forth thing or whatever, but it's got a good sound to it. It's just not very loud.
Yeah.
Which I think sometimes if you're talking like a heavy wind situation or whatever, it's going to be tough. But it does sound like the same, like the tone is spot on. and then like the actual volume is probably pretty similar to a deer.
Right.
You know, so
it's
going to make sense to where like, you know, if a buck's 200 yards away and he hears a bleh, and then there's, you know, a deer 200 yards away, he's like, how did that thing make that loud of a noise? I ain't going over there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I like it.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, so, dude, we've talked about it at the beginning of this podcast, but we've got a storm rolling in right now. It's like sweaty hot, kind of nasty, humid, muggy right now, but it's supposed to cool off tonight. Mm-hmm. It's supposed to be like a pretty decent drop in temps. And so I'm going tomorrow around here, but I don't really know. Like, I think my best bet's going to be to go to public.
I think that would be a good choice, man. I think, for one, if I could go tomorrow morning, I probably would, and I would probably go out there. For two, like, it's still an acorn pattern right now. And, yes, the bucks are paying attention to the does, which we saw, was it yesterday? We saw that buck trying to breed a doe like a mature buck, you know. Yeah. So if you want to do like a little deductive reasoning there, the does are probably going to be hungry because it got cold. They're going to go to acorns. Who's going to be there smelling around?
Bucky Buck.
Are you going after teeny tomorrow?
No, probably
no.
Well, I mean, I might. I don't know. There's a couple different spots that I've been thinking about that are not too far to make it like a dang Kansas trip or something, you know. Mm-hmm. But like that is one area. And there's that oak belt right there that we hung a camera in. Mm-hmm. You remember that? By the creek, a northwest wind would be pretty good on that, I feel like. And then there is, but that's a long ways in, and I'm probably going to get lost going in if I did that. There's Babylon, sets up pretty well for northwest, right?
I think straight north is better, but northwest could work. You know, like that's the stand we talked about that has like that really tricky wind where like you wouldn't think the wind would work good, but because of thermal action, a northerly wind works really good because it sends your scent straight up. But I think that's like a north or northeast situation. Yeah. So I don't know if that would work great. I mean, by all means, go over there if you want to, but I don't know if how the northwest would treat you, you know?
Where would the other place, I had one other place that I was thinking about. On pub that I thought would work pretty well with a northwest wind.
Talked about TL over on the west side of TL.
TL, yeah. Well, TL even on the east side would be good too.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, there's some things to think about. We'll have to maybe figure that out a little more off air, but I would like to hunt my private. It's right here. Mm-hmm. I don't have to go very far, you know.
Yeah.
And I've got, I've got probably a couple of better deer. Well, one at least better deer than I do that I've seen on camera on our public spots anywhere so far this year, really. So like. That's kind of like why I would like to hunt there. But the thing is, I just checked my cameras yesterday out there, and I had two cameras running. One of them only had like 3 pictures on it. The other one was taking videos. Had like 140 videos over the last like 5 or 6 days. And I think I know one video had a mature buck in it. That was a shooter. And he was there at 10:22 at night, and he walked through in about 10 seconds. And so I'm just like, man, I could see it happening. It's going to be November 1st. It's going to be 55 as a high. It's going to be chilly. It's going to be a northwest wind. Like, I can see it happening. But do I want to take a chance on that when I can go somewhere where I know, that deer or, shooter bucks are possibly moving around and living. That's the thing, is they don't live on this property. So
yeah,
that's kind of my issue there. I don't know. Another thing is I'd like to shoot a doe during doe season. So it's one of those things like I'd like to shoot a doe tomorrow as well. But then it's kind of a lot of meat to put up before we leave to Kansas and that whole thing, and packing and everything else. So it's kind of a big first world problem, I guess, is all I got to say.
Yeah, well, either way, dude, you're going to have a good hunt, I think, tomorrow. I'm going to try to go hunt tomorrow evening on my local place here, just because that's what I'm going to have time to do. But either way, it's November 1st, man.
I know.
This is
it's crazy.
like the other 11 months of the year, we're thinking about this month.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
to all you out there listening, happy November.
That's right.
Troll.
You know what? If you're listening to the podcast and you don't know yet, 2 days ago, we did a big buck breakdown with Luke Leahy, and he shot a monster in Kansas. But we gave away a trail camera on that episode.
We did,
Yep.
but we actually have yet to give the trail camera away.
Nobody's claimed it yet. have they?
Nobody's claimed it yet.
Yeah.
So you better go listen, because I don't think we're going to say the name of the person who won that except for on that big buck breakdown.
Yeah.
Right? So you
Right.
got to go listen to it to see who it is.
Yeah.
But we definitely did give it away to a legit person, read the review on the podcast.
Yeah.
So go listen to that episode, see if it was you. If so, send us a message on any of our platforms, and we'll be sure and get you a Exodus Trek, because you want to get it right now because the rut is starting, right? Got to get
That's
that
right.
sucker out.
Got to. And, you know, it's definitely, if he doesn't claim it, or she, whoever it might be, if they don't claim it pretty soon, we're going to put a smile on somebody else's face. You know what I mean?
Maybe ours.
We'll be taking it to Kansas and then giving it to somebody
That's
else.
right.
So, yeah, anyway, hit us up. And don't forget, this is your element.
Living it.
The new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook Wild Game Recipes for the Grill, Smoker, Campfire, and Camp Stove is out on April 24th and is available for pre-order now. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside, from grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Pre-order your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com.